All right, we're back here on Is It Prophecy, Israel National Radio, Arut Sheva, and the show is simulcasted as Messiah Hour on YouTube. Email me at messiahhour@gmail.com. We're continuing the conversation with Rabbi David Katz of SoulMazal.com. Now, Rabbi Katz, before the break, we were talking about modern conspiracy theories that are anti-Zionism. I'm curious about some of the national rules that are seen through Zionism. And also, if you can talk a bit about George Bush, not one of the presidents, a biblical scholar that was born in 1796. I know he had some interesting things to say about Zionism.
Yeah, so again, when we look at the conspiracists and all these things, a large part of it, obviously, you can look at the Illuminati, for one, whatever that is. And when you go Illuminati, you're talking Wealth, Rockefeller, Rothschild, all the names we know. And if you go even just an inch further, you're going to eventually come to people like Harper, the PM of Canada, Obama, Clinton's, Bush's, right, the royalty of England, right? So eventually, the anti-Semitism, Zionism, will go towards the global elite, right? That's just the way it goes. And the reason why that you'll get to the global heads in terms of the conspiracy is because they are involved, but not the way they think. And they're never going to get the way they think because it's deeply religious in a true sense. So if you're thinking, horns and pitchforks, you're not going to get it.
Yes, that would be a good thing. So talk about then Christian Zionism, because I'll just say it like it is. I kind of wish all the Jews were as Zionistic as some of these Christians in the United States. I mean, a huge part of our listenership to this very show are Christians living in the United States. They love Israel. And I want to know why that is, where does that come from, and some of the American roots about that.
Right. So it began, the right-wing radical Christian Zionist concept began around the time of, you mentioned George Bush. He's going to write in 1844, not 19, 1844, a commentary of Ezekiel, and this is going to be a beginning of a further breakaway from the church. It's a more evangelical movement, and the premise was stop learning text from a mystical point of view, right? Kind of a magical, mystical, blah blah blah, right? But look at it analytical and in textual analysis. And the premise was, what would happen if we took Ezekiel literal? Right? You're already getting, Gog and Magog and the Third Temple, which again is a major conspiracy thing, and in the book of Ezekiel. And this movement says, let's look at it literal. And hey, you know what we should do? We should take the Jews and put them on their land, and we'll convert them to Christianity, and the Messiah will come. Now, this was said 100 years before, Zionism culminated in a state. But, he mapped out exactly what happened. So again, America, 1844, and this went north of the border into Canada. So the Canadian PMs are going to be involved in this blend. It's actually interesting because I know that exact Nakuda from my cousin was one of the Zionist scholars that actually educated a few of the Canadian PMs. And my mom is actually going to send me, we found some of his old books in Zionism, and I'm looking forward to reading them. So he was involved in Christian Zionism in the early 20th century.
And this is part of the reason why you talk about Canada, that Stephen Harper is very pro-Israel. I mean, he's one of the most pro-Israel people on planet Earth right now.
Yeah, and so, that was a big question I had. Why? Why? So you look into it, and he's got this George Bush flavor evangelical movement in his mind. And, it's Israel, the Jews in the land. And when they say convert the Jews to Christianity, you have to understand the evangelical word Christian is not the same as the Catholic. Right? The word is morphed. Just like in my Ger word, convert versus Ger Toshav, both derived from ger, can be a convert versus ger toshav, and there's a rainbow of definitions. In the Christian world, the word Christian itself has different connotations, per movement. And the Messianic Jew has a different word for Christian than the Pope, and that's the whole claim of the Pope against different blends of Christianity, which is one reason why we see ISIS knocking heads off and the Pope not doing anything. Now, with that said, the Canadian PM, I saw some links when he was in Israel. His personal kind of anguish is he wants to keep the Sabbath. Now, the Pope, from many, many years ago, moved the Sabbath of the Ten Commandments to Sunday, which is why Christians worship on Sunday. But the modern, coming off the exit ramp Christians, the literal Ezekiel movement, want Sabbath back on Saturday. And they don't really understand why, this and that. Now, to me, as a rabbi, I call that ger. I call that the righteous of the nations. He calls it, I better do my part with Israel and the Jews so we can get the Sabbath back in order. So again, he doesn't understand the Torah angle, but he understands that it's very good to be a Zionist because it restores his own spirituality, even though he can't explain how. He knows that right-wing Zionism from the Christian idea works. It just works.
Again, you're listening to Is It Prophecy here on Israel National Radio, Arut Sheva, and the show is simulcast as Messiah Hour on YouTube. You can email me, messiahhour@gmail.com. Now, I wanted to talk about, with Christian Zionism, as a Jew, should we be accepting of it because the initial concept is to convert us to Christianity, which is not what we want to do, but if they are supporting Israel, how do we go about taking some kindness or keeping a boundary and not going too much because we don't want to change our religion, obviously?
Yeah, this is the most modern challenge. I mean, you have a Messianic Christianity movement, or Messianic Judaism, sorry, movement in Israel growing by the day. Now, these are potential ger toshav, ger, whatever you want to call it. So you don't want to say, get lost, but at the same time, they want you to be a Christian. So it's a very, very touchy-feely situation. And you have global leaders pushing Christian Zionism with their own doctrines of make the Jews Christian, but under the covers, what they want is ger, what they want is a relationship with God, what they want is the Sabbath returned in a way that they can keep it, which we have, but they don't know that. They don't know what they're asking for. All they know is, from a different perspective, it's good to push this view. And maybe if the view was conceived in something treif, it's become aligned with something kosher, but it's not conveyed in kosher terms. It's not thought of in kosher terms. And that's really where we're at as a people. How do we get rid of our, lack of authentic Zionism and replace a good Zionism? How do we rectify all the wrongs of history and the stumbling blocks of World Wars I and II and bring the Messianic movement in truth to Israel with the Third Temple, with the Jews, and with the exiles coming in that includes the righteous non-Jews? Everyone basically has to drop their Narishkeit.
Interesting. So it's definitely a touch-and-go situation. How do you think that we have handled it up to this point? Are you happy with how the state of Israel or Jews in Israel, etc., have dealt with this situation?
The good news is only God could have drawn this up. I mean, George Bush writes the book, and then we come, and then you got Herzl, then you got the Gra. I mean, come on, man. Every major player in the last 200 years has been involved. This is fantastic. To manage these parts, only God could do. So far, we've won. I mean, Israel is phenomenal. The startups coming out of here. I mean, Israel is the place to be. You made all the as well as I did, and this is the place to be. I mean, it really is. People in the investment world will tell you, I don't care what bomb comes to Israel, they're still going to be in Israel. The world cannot afford there not to be in Israel. So it's happening, and the Torah religious end will follow suit very soon. Things are being fixed up. How it's going to go, again, only God can engineer the pieces because He started it and He's going to have to finish it.
All right, so we were talking about Christian Zionism. I want to talk about Haredi Zionism, and part of the reason I really want to talk about this is, I'll be honest with you, I hate secular Zionism. I really, really don't like it. Herzl said some really awful things. His original goal was to convert all the Jews to Christianity, and some of the elements of secular Zionism, I don't like that. And if people out there, some of my friends or whatever, listening to like that, that's just the way it is. That's truth. I want to talk Haredi Zionism. What exactly is that, and how does that play a role into what we're talking about?
Right. So just like you're saying, 1948, when secular Zionism was official, the Haredim said, "Who?
Where did you guys come from?
Herzl, who? He was.
We've been here for 200 years."
Right. So they didn't know when they said they didn't know of it, they knew very well of it. And therefore, they forgot it very quickly. They buried the books. The Vilna Gaon's books on this were buried because, as true as the Vilna Gaon's message was, it was only going to strengthen a treif entity, right? Secular Zionism, and therefore it had to be buried. And they were right in doing it. Rav Kook was your bridge. He was the one that was hired pretty much to make pure a sheretz, a dead rat. So his answer for purifying it was the heter mechira type system. Right? You can live on the land, and rabbinically you can buy a cucumber in the Shemitah year. He made that possible because what he did was he included the ger toshav, the righteous non-Jew, in the equation to make it work. Now it's not perfect, but it works. And even though a lot of people don't hold of it, it allows the secular Zionist to be raised up to a standard that it's not forbidden to be here. Now, that existed for a while, and that's what made it possible. Again, you can't get married here unless you go to Beis Din.
Right.
So Rav Kook set up kind of an archaic Judaism, but it's worked and it was necessary. And now they want to mavatal the whole thing. They want to throw out Rav Kook Judaism and bring in Naftali Bennett Judaism, which, as much as I kind of accept what he's doing more than, let's say, the rest, his Judaism is horrible. Right? It's not Judaism. It's ultra-liberalism. So the Haredi has really not found himself in Zionism. He's accepted, like I said at the beginning, he's accepted the great falafel, and the monorail in Jerusalem. That's fantastic for living in Israel. The capitalist and the beautiful Sfarim and, the beautiful old city. Okay, we have that. And that is technically Zionism. But the Haredim have not connected to the neshama of it. And that will be a revisitation of the Vilna Gaon's works. And I think that's where we are. We're going back to, the original, Chabad. The Rebbe's been gone 10, 20 years. And so I think Lubavitchers are not rejecting Lubavitch, but looking at the spectrum, to where it began. The Gronics, the Vilna Gaon lovers, are getting into authentic Vilna Gaon. His Kabbalah, his Zionist views. And when the Haredim really understand what the land of Israel is, then we can begin to perform what Rav David Bar Chaim calls Torat Eretz Yisrael, the Torah of the land of Israel, which is a main cog of the Vilna Gaon Zionism. Really being a Jew in the land according to Torah. It's the precedent's already been established. They've already written the books. It literally, all it's missing is pushing out that information. That's all that is missing.
Again, you're listening to Is It Prophecy here on Israel National Radio at Route Sheva, and the show is simulcasted as Messiah Hour on YouTube. Email me at messiahhour@gmail.com. Our guest this afternoon is Rabbi David Katz of Somazal.com. Now, talking about the Haredi perspective on Zionism, how exactly is it that there could be more Haredi Zionism? Meaning, the Haredim look and say, this secular Zionism, this is foreign, we don't like this. What can they do and what can we do to get more authentic Zionism? That was started with the Vilna Gaon. That is about Torah Judaism and Torah values.
The model is eloquently simple. The Haredi can tell you how great life was in Krakow and about how they made challah and the mikvahs, and we know all about Krakow. But they don't know about Eretz Yisrael. And I'll make a comparison. The ger that I teach, right, the non-Jew of the Torah. We have 50% of our Torah can be applied to the non-Jewish world. But we don't touch it. It's not for us. We're not non-Jews. So we know Jewish stuff. But if you have a desire to look in the Torah and research the non-Jewish elements, the non-Jews have an entire teaching, a Torah that is waiting for them. And it just needs the connection. So we have a Torah of the land of Israel in our Torah. But we had no reason to look at it for 2,000 years. And it's to the point where you would think it doesn't exist. But the point is, the Vilna Gaon wrote about it. The Chabadniks were into it. Ramban was probably into it in his writings a little bit, which I know for a fact. The Ramchal. We have a Masorah tradition. And if you research and investigate, again, as I said, by Zionism, the problem is not the complexity of understanding it. It's plumbing its depths. So we have a huge Torah. But if you're really interested in the land of Israel and Zionism, it's there. And I mean the real Zionism, how to be a Jew in the land, even to the point of coming out of exile. We have the material. All it needs is revisited. The whole thing holding us back is Narishkeit. To say that we can't get on the Temple Mount, that is ridiculous. Now, philosophically, you may have what to oppose, and you're right in doing so. The Vilna Gaon says don't stress the end, and he means the Temple Mount, however you want to interpret that. But to say halachically it's usher, forbidden, no, it isn't. No, it isn't. And again, I don't mind if you have a problem philosophically going up. That's your business between you and God. But don't say it's usher, because it isn't. So all these little stumbling blocks need removed, if not philosophically, then in terms of permitted, forbidden, for the sake of coming into the land itself. We're still coming into the land, and the Torah will be a huge aiding and abetting of the Jews coming into the land, even when we're here, and strengthening our awareness as we're here.
Okay, talk about a bit why it's not sore. I find this a very interesting topic. I know a lot of people won't feel comfortable going up there because basically the argument of going up there is we're not sure exactly where the Holy of Holies is, and people are quote-unquote Tameh, so they shouldn't go there, etc. Tell us what are the reasons why a person would be allowed to go up on the Temple Mount if they so choose.
So again, I like to make a lot of comparisons with my personal work because it serves as a great a mushal or analogy. Sure. Ask anyone in the world what a ger is; they'll tell you it's a convert. And and if you say, okay, you swear? They say, yes, I swear. But it isn't. Right? It just flat out isn't. It is a fact. Right? It may be a convert in times, but it's a big word with at least 20 different directions and meanings. And it means a lot of different things. So when they swear up and down, it's a convert, it isn't. And so when you educate, they say, well, I didn't think about it that way. Okay. So real quick, they'd like to detract their statements. Now, the Temple Mount, for the matters of the forbidden, it's not forbidden. Right? There's always a bit of a political kind of, you shouldn't go up and I'll prove it with it. But really, can you go up? There's nothing preventing anyone from going up. And the level of where there would be a trespass, you're not allowed to go in beyond that anyways.
All right. Last question I have for you, Rabbi, is I want to go back to the secular Zionism thing because it's on my mind, in that I just hate this image that people think that Torah Judaism is not really deep down Zionism as far as authentic Zionism, that everything got confused and everything got changed around. I want to know some of the things we could do. I mean, obviously we have the show, educate people, etc. But I want to know some of the things we can do action-wise to show that Torah Zionism, that's what we all got to be doing. The Vilna Gaon, his thoughts, his philosophy, those are the steps we got to take. So how can we go about doing that?
So I think this question comes up in a lot of the work that I do. It's like, wow, Rabbi Katz, the non-Jew, that's great. The ger, it's great. Now what do I do? And it's like, the problem, and I think you're experiencing it here, how would you ever give this over? Wow, Rabbi Katz was interesting about, alter Zionism, but how do you give that over? There's this Vilna Gaon thing, I forget what he called it, and he, it's old. It's almost impossible to give it over. And therefore, I think, really just getting back and making a movement and commitment to learning essential material. Really reintroducing material that we did not make a first priority, and we should. For example, anyone dealing with the nations should learn ger. That's just step one. Right? You don't have to call it, the Noahide or the righteous of the nations, or the righteous Gentile, for crying out loud. That sounds horrible. Call it for what it is. Be in the land of Israel. Do the land of Israel things. And, Vilna Gaon Zionism, it's available to us. The books are there. They're in the original Hebrew, but there's no reason why we can't get study groups started, and get the learning going, and then the information will disseminate. That's the best way to counter it. Because if you just come up to a Satmar and say, hey, you're wrong, I have a right to be here. I mean, good luck with that one. Go break into Meisharim and tell them they're wrong.
What about going to a secular Jew and saying, this is not, your lifestyle is not what Zionism is actually about?
Right.
That way.
Right. It's just that no one hears it. You're not, the secular Zionist doesn't know what he's doing anymore. He has no idea. He's just happy that the falafel tastes good with his mapucha. He's an Ashkenazi and he claims he makes mapucha. I mean, that's how bad, that's what it is. But, I mean, really, you have to go back to the Torah. And the good news is it's there. You don't have to, find some, missing needle in the haystack. We have the information, and there just needs to be a Zionism 2.0. Just like Herzl rounded up the everybody in Tuma, right? Harassing Rothschild for checks, okay? You should be harassing rabbis to teach you authentic Vilna Gaon Zionism. Kol HaTorah is one of those amazing books ever written. Why is it not being studied? Why is Tanakh forbidden to learn in Haredi yeshivas? Why do the secular Zionists pervert the Tanakh? So what's the answer? Go learn the Tanakh. Open it up and learn it the way it should be learned. Don't accept the party line. In my work, again, to draw an example, there's a character in the Tanakh called Naaman. Everyone will say he's either, he was the greatest Jew that ever lived, or, he was a convert, or he was an idolater. What are you talking about? He was a Ger Toshav. Why don't we say that? Because they never heard of what a Ger Toshav was. They don't know what it is to say that's what he was. But when you open it up and you look in the original, and the authentic, you'll see, here's a Ger Toshav in the land of Israel, with a real prophet when there was a real temple standing. Go look at what real Israel is in the real sources and learn it, and it will disseminate. And I believe the Haredi will hear it one day, and the secular will raise up to it because they have nothing left anyways.
That's true. Secular Zionism is about as dead as it could be.
Right.
Anyways, on that note, we've got to go. Rabbi David Katz, somazal.com, has been my guest this afternoon. Rabbi Katz, thank you so much for your time. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Ari, for having me, and it's always a pleasure to be here and spend time with you and get to know all the listeners.
If you have any questions, email me at messiahhour@gmail.com. This has been Is It Prophecy on IsraelNationalRadio.com.